November 23rd, 1942. 08:47 hours. C. Divosid, Tunisia. Generalmajor Frederick von Broich stood motionless in the North African dust, his polished boots sinking slightly into sand still cool from the desert night. Around him, the wreckage of the previous day's engagement lay scattered across the rocky terrain. Burned-out British Crusader tanks sent thin columns of smoke into the morning air. Abandoned artillery pieces pointed at nothing. The detritus of retreat covered the ground like fallen leaves after an autumn storm. But von Broich's attention was fixed on something else entirely, something that made no sense to his carefully trained military mind. 12 meters away sat a small, open-topped vehicle unlike anything in the Wehrmacht inventory. It was absurdly compact, barely larger than a motorcycle with a sidecar. The hood was flat, almost crude in its simplicity. The windshield folded down against the hood like an afterthought, for small wheels supported a body that seemed too minimal to serve any serious military purpose. The thing looked like a childish toy compared to the massive Kübelwagens and Hork staff cars that German officers relied upon. Yet this tiny vehicle had been captured intact, with a dead American officer slumped over its steering wheel, killed by a single rifled round through his helmet. The vehicle itself bore no damage. Not one bullet hole, not one scratch beyond the dust and wear of desert travel. The American had died. His vehicle remained perfect. Von Broich circled the machine slowly, his adjutant Hauptmann Werner Griesheim following at a respectful distance. The general reached out and touched the flat hood, feeling metal that was still warm from the previous day's sun, now cooling in the morning air. "What is this thing?" Bombrack asked, not expecting an answer. Griesheim consulted his intelligence notes. "The Americans call it a Jeep, Herr Generalmajor. General-purpose vehicle. Our intelligence reports mention it, but this is the first one captured intact in our sector." Von Broich walked to the rear of the vehicle and examined the spare tire mounted on the back. He looked at the simple leaf spring suspension. He noted the lack of doors, the absence of any protection for the occupants, the primitive canvas top folded behind the seats. Everything about it spoke of haste, of expedience, of shortcuts taken. "It looks like something built in a weekend by farmers," von Broich said. He meant it as criticism. Within 6 months, he would learn that he had accidentally described the vehicle's greatest strength. What Generalmajor von Broich could not know, standing in that Tunisian dust in November 19, was that he was looking at the most important vehicle of the Second World War. Not the most powerful, not the fastest, not the most heavily armored. The most important. The vehicle that would move more men, haul more supplies, perform more missions, and ultimately do more to win the war than any tank, truck, or aircraft in any nation's inventory. Within 30 months, American factories would produce over 640,000 of these simple machines. They would serve in every theater, on every front, in every climate, from Arctic tundra to tropical jungle. They would be modified into ambulances, reconnaissance vehicles, railway locomotives, snowplows, fire trucks, and mobile machine gun platforms. They would carry generals and privates, ammunition and wounded, messages and death. The Jeep would become the physical embodiment of American industrial philosophy. Build it simple. Build it tough. Build it by the hundreds of thousands until quantity becomes its own form of quality. Standing beside that captured vehicle in Tunisia, von Broich was witnessing the future of mechanized warfare. He simply did not recognize it yet. The story of the American Jeep began not with military genius, but with bureaucratic desperation. In the summer of 1940, as German panzers swept across France and the British Army abandoned its equipment at Dunkirk, the United States Army found itself preparing for a war it was not ready to fight. The Army's standard light reconnaissance vehicle was the motorcycle with sidecar, a holdover from the First World War that performed poorly off-road and offered no protection or carrying capacity. Various civilian trucks had been pressed into service, but none met the military's increasingly urgent requirements. The modern Army needed something new. On June 27, 1940, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps issued an almost impossible request to American automobile manufacturers. They wanted a light reconnaissance vehicle weighing no more than 1,300 pounds, capable of carrying 600 pounds of payload. It needed a wheelbase of 75 inches or less, with a track width of 47 inches. The vehicle had to have four-wheel drive, a fold-down windshield, and 3 bucket seats. It needed to mount a machine gun and ford water up to 18 inches deep. Most remarkably, they wanted working prototypes delivered within 49 days. 135 American companies received the specifications, only to responded that they could meet the deadline. American Bantam Car Company and Willys Ford Motor Company expressed interest, but stated they could not meet the timeline. American Bantam was a tiny company in Butler, Pennsylvania. Wheat Fort and 500 employees, and a history of building small civilian cars that had never sold well. They should have been the last choice for a major military contract, but they were the first to respond. And their chief designer, a freelance engineer named Karl Probst, was desperate enough for work to accept an impossible challenge. Probst arrived at Bantam's facility on July 17, 1940, and was presented with the Army's requirements. He had never designed a military vehicle. He had 18 days to create something that had never existed before. Working around the clock, sleeping on a cot in the engineering office, Probst completed his initial design in just 5 days. The first Bantam prototype, designated the BRC-60, was delivered to Camp Holabird, Maryland, on September 21, 1940, just 2 days before the Army's deadline. The vehicle that rolled off the trailer that morning was rough, incomplete, and exceeded the weight specifications by several hundred pounds. Its engine overheated during testing. The transfer case leaked oil. The steering wandered at highway speeds. None of that mattered. The Army saw immediately that they were looking at something revolutionary. Major Herbert J. Loss, who supervised the initial testing, wrote in his evaluation report, "This vehicle demonstrates capabilities far beyond our initial requirements. Cross-country performance exceeds any vehicle currently in our inventory. The combination of lightweight, four-wheel drive, and low center of gravity creates a reconnaissance platform superior to anything we have previously tested." The Army was so impressed that they did something that would shape the Jeep's future. They shared Bantam-esque designs with Willys Overland and Ford, allowing both companies to build competing prototypes. Bantam had invented the Jeep. American industrial policy would ensure that everyone could build it. This decision seemed unfair to Bantam, and it was, but it would prove essential to winning the war. No single company, especially not a small one like Bantam, could produce vehicles in the quantities the Army would eventually need. By sharing the design, the military ensured that American industry as a whole could mobilize to produce Jeeps by the hundreds of thousands. Willys Overland submitted their prototype, the Willys Quad. In November 1940, Ford followed with their Pygmy. All 3 vehicles underwent extensive testing through the winter of 1940-1941, driving thousands of miles over every terrain the Army could find. The Willys design eventually won the standardization contract, primarily because of its engine. The Godevel, a 60-horsepower 4-cylinder power plant that delivered more torque at low speeds than either competitor. This engine would become legendary for its reliability, its ability to run on almost any fuel, and its simplicity of maintenance. But the final production vehicle, designated the Willys MB, incorporated elements from all 3 prototypes. The distinctive flat hood came from Ford. The front grille design came from Willys. Various structural improvements came from Bantam's original concept. The Jeep was not invented by any single company. It was evolved through competition into something greater than any single design. Production began in 1941, and by the time of Pearl Harbor, the Army had received approximately 20,000 Jeeps. Within 4 years, that number would grow to over 640,000, produced by both Willys and Ford in identical specifications so that parts were completely interchangeable. The German military first encountered the Jeep in significant numbers during the North African campaign of 1942. Their initial assessments were dismissive, reflecting a fundamental misunderstanding of what the vehicle represented. Oberst Kramer, serving on Rommel's staff during the Tunisia campaign, wrote to his wife in December 1942, "The Americans have arrived with their small open cars that look like they belong on a farm rather than a battlefield. Our Kübelwagen is far superior in every way. The American vehicle offers no protection from sun, sand, or enemy fire. Its engine is noisy and unsophisticated compared to our air-cooled Volkswagen design. I cannot understand why they chose this machine over proper military vehicles." This assessment was technically accurate in almost every respect. DA, based on Ferdinand Porsche's Volkswagen Beetle, was quieter, more refined, and better suited to desert conditions thanks to its air-cooled engine. German engineering had produced a vehicle specifically designed for military use, with careful attention to every detail. The Jeep, by contrast, was a hasty improvisation thrown together in weeks rather than years. Its water-cooled engine was vulnerable to overheating in desert conditions. Its open body offered no protection from anything. Its ride quality was harsh, its noise level excessive, its finish crude. And yet, within 18 months, German officers would trade Iron Crosses for captured Jeeps. Within 2 years, the Jeep would become the most sought-after prize on every battlefield where Americans fought. The reason lay not in any single superiority, but in an accumulation of small advantages that added up to overwhelming capability. The Jeep could go anywhere. Its combination of lightweight, short wheelbase, four-wheel drive, and high ground clearance allowed it to traverse terrain that stopped heavier vehicles dead. It climbed grades that would stall a Kübelwagen. It crossed sand that would bog down a truck. It drove through mud that would swallow a motorcycle. Where roads existed, the Jeep used them. Where they did not, the Jeep made its own. Sergeant William Malden, the famous Stars and Stripes cartoonist who served in Italy, described the Jeep's cross-country capability in his book Up Front. It climbs mountains that would give a goat pause. It fords streams that would drown a fish. It goes places that would embarrass a mule. And it does all this while carrying 4 men, their weapons, their ammunition, and their complaints about the ride quality. The Jeep could do anything. Its basic design was so simple and so adaptable that soldiers modified it for every purpose imaginable. Within months of entering combat, Jeeps had been converted into ambulances capable of carrying 3 stretchers. They mounted machine guns, bazookas, and recoilless rifles. They towed artillery pieces weighing 3 times their own weight. They carried communications equipment, generating sets, and water pumps. They served as mobile command posts for generals and mail delivery vehicles for supply sergeants. Private First Class Harold Linebaugh of the 84th Infantry Division recalled the versatility in his memoir. Our Jeep was an ambulance on Monday, a supply truck on Tuesday, a weapons carrier on Wednesday, a mobile kitchen on Thursday, and a general staff car on Friday. On Saturday, we washed it. On Sunday, it broke down, and we fixed it with parts from 3 other Jeeps, none of which matched, all of which worked. Above all, the Jeep could be fixed. This was perhaps its most crucial advantage, and the one that German logistics officers came to envy most bitterly. The Jeep's design philosophy prioritized simplicity above all else. Its engine used technology that dated to the 1920s. Its electrical system was basic to the point of crudeness. Its drivetrain employed no advanced engineering, no complex mechanisms, no delicate components that required specialized tools or training to maintain. Any soldier with basic mechanical knowledge could repair a Jeep. The Army produced maintenance manuals written at a 6th grade reading level, with illustrations clear enough that men who spoke no English could follow them. Spare parts were standardized, interchangeably, and produced in such quantities that supply was rarely a problem. Technical Sergeant Raymond Collins, a motor pool supervisor with the 3rd Armored Division, explained. A Jeep would come in with the transmission making noises like a cement mixer full of broken glass. We'd have it stripped down, the transmission swapped out from salvage, and the whole thing back together in 3 hours. Try that with a German vehicle. You'd need parts machined in Berlin, tools shipped from Bavaria, and a technician trained for 2 years. We had parts piled in every depot from here to New Jersey, and any farm boy who'd ever fixed a tractor could install them. The contrast with German military vehicles was stark and consequential. The Wehrmacht's motor pool included over 150 different vehicle types, each requiring unique parts, specialized tools, and trained mechanics. German factories produced vehicles of exceptional quality, but in limited quantities with limited standardization. When a Kübelwagen broke down in North Africa, the repair might require parts that could only be sourced from a specific factory in Germany. When a Mercedes staff car needed transmission work, only mechanics trained on that specific model could perform the repair correctly. The German military achieved excellence through complexity. That complexity became a fatal weakness when supply lines stretched across continents. The Americans achieved adequacy through simplicity. That simplicity became overwhelming strength when multiplied by 600,000 identical vehicles, all using identical parts, all maintainable by any soldier with a wrench and a manual. Generalleutnant Fritz Bajerlein, who served under Rommel in Africa, and later commanded the Panzerlehr division in Normandy, captured this realization in his post-war memoir. The American Jeep was not a better vehicle than our Kübelwagen in any individual metric. It was noisier, rougher, less refined in every way. But there were so many of them, and when one broke, they simply brought up another, while our vehicles waited weeks for spare parts that might never arrive. We were fighting their logistics with our engineering. Logistics 1. The Jeep's impact on battlefield mobility transformed how American forces operated. Commanders at every level, from squad leaders to theater commanders, found themselves able to move faster, communicate more reliably, and respond to changing situations more quickly than any army in history. In traditional military doctrine, infantry moved on foot while vehicles were reserved for artillery, supplies, and high-ranking officers. The Jeep changed this calculus entirely. Its production in such vast quantities meant that vehicles were available for purposes that would have seemed wasteful to European military minds. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole, who commanded the 3rd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, described the transformation. Before the Jeep, a battalion commander might have one vehicle, if he was lucky. We had Jeeps for the commander, Jeeps for the staff, Jeeps for reconnaissance, Jeeps for communications, Jeeps for evacuation. We moved like cavalry. The Germans moved like it was still 1918. This mobility multiplied. American combat power far beyond what raw numbers would suggest. A company that could respond in minutes rather than hours. A battalion that could concentrate from multiple directions. Simultaneously, a division that could shift reserves faster than the enemy could. React to these advantages stemmed directly from the Jeep's ubiquitous presence. The medical impact alone was revolutionary. Before the Jeep, wounded soldiers were evacuated by stretcher bearers, a slow and dangerous process that often meant death for men who might have survived with prompt treatment. The Jeep, converted into a field ambulance with minimal modification, could evacuate casualties from the front line to aid stations in minutes rather than hours. Captain James Gruner, a surgeon with the 45th Infantry Division, estimated the impact in the First World War. A badly wounded man at the front had perhaps a 30% chance of reaching a hospital alive. With Jeep ambulances, that number approached 80%. The vehicle saved more lives than any medical innovation of the war. It saved them by getting men to treatment, while treatment could still help. By early 1943, German intelligence had thoroughly analyzed captured Jeeps and produced a comprehensive technical assessment. The report, circulated to senior Wehrmacht commanders in March 1943, demonstrated that German engineers fully understood the Jeep's design and capabilities. The analysis noted the vehicle's crude construction, its unsophisticated engine, its lack of innovation in virtually every mechanical system. German engineers, accustomed to the precise tolerances and advanced designs of their own automotive industry, found little to admire in the Jeep's engineering. Major Helmi Rietken, a technical intelligence officer, wrote in the assessment's conclusion, "The American light reconnaissance vehicle represents no advancement in automotive design. Its construction methods are primitive. Its engine is obsolete by European standards. Its finish and attention to detail are far below German industrial norms. We can produce superior vehicles with little difficulty." This assessment was entirely correct about the Jeep's technical characteristics. It missed entirely the point of the vehicle's design. The Jeep was not built to be superior. It was built to be sufficient in unlimited quantities. American war planners understood something that German engineers did not. In a global war of attrition, the ability to produce adequate equipment in overwhelming numbers would defeat the ability to produce superior equipment in limited numbers. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel grasped this truth earlier than most. After the American landings in North Africa, Rommel told his staff, "The Americans are not military professionals like us. They are engineers and factory managers in uniform. They do not think about warfare as we do. They think about warfare as a production problem. We must destroy their will to produce, or we must lose. Destroying their army will not be enough. They will simply produce another one. The German response to the Jeep's success was characteristic of Wehrmacht thinking. They attempted to build a better vehicle rather than more vehicles. In late 1943, development began on the Volkswagen Type 166 Schwimmwagen, an amphibious vehicle intended to match the Jeep's versatility while adding water-crossing capability. The Schwimmwagen was in many respects a superior design. It could swim across rivers that would stop a Jeep. Its air-cooled engine performed better in extreme temperatures. Its construction quality exceeded American standards. Germany produced approximately 15,000 Schwimmwagens. During the war, America produced more than 640,000 Jeeps, plus over 650,000 of the larger Dodge WC series trucks that shared the Jeep's design philosophy. For every special-purpose German vehicle, America built 40 general-purpose vehicles that could be adapted to any purpose. Optman, Karl Wegner, a logistics officer with the 21st Panzer Division, described the practical impact. I submitted a request for 20 Kübelwagens in June 1944. By the time they arrived in September, we had retreated 400 kilometers and lost half our combat strength. The Americans we captured told us they received new Jeeps weekly, sometimes daily. They complained about the paperwork. We would have traded a tank battalion for their paperwork problems. The Jeep's role in the D-Day invasion demonstrated its capabilities on the largest possible scale. In the days following June 6, 1944, thousands of Jeeps poured across Normandy's beaches, providing the mobility that allowed American forces to break out of their beachheads and pursue the retreating Wehrmacht across France. The speed of the American advance stunned German commanders accustomed to more deliberate operations. Units that expected days to prepare defensive positions found American reconnaissance Jeeps probing their lines within hours. Supply columns they planned to ambush had already passed, protected by Jeep-mounted patrols. Communication networks they hoped to disrupt were maintained by Jeep-borne messengers who took alternate routes faster than roadblocks could be established. General de Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding Panzer Group West during the Normandy campaign, wrote in his operational diary, "The American advance moves at the speed of their small vehicles. We cannot establish defensive lines because their reconnaissance finds our positions before we complete them. We cannot concentrate forces because their mobility allows them to strike and withdraw before we can respond. Every crossroads has their Jeeps. Every road has their patrols. We are fighting an enemy who moves like water, flowing around every obstacle we place." The French campaign revealed another aspect of American logistics that German commanders found demoralizing: the willingness to expend vehicles rather than soldiers. When Jeeps broke down during the advance, they were often abandoned rather than repaired. Recovery vehicles would collect them later, but the advance would not pause. When Jeeps were damaged by enemy fire, crews transferred to replacement vehicles waiting at supply points. The pace of operations was determined by mission requirements, not by equipment availability. Oberstleutnant Friedrich von der Helft, commanding the 6th Parachute Regiment during the Normandy campaign, observed, "We captured American soldiers who complained that their Jeep had been destroyed 3 times in a month. 3 times, and each time they simply received another one. Our men nursed their vehicles like beloved horses, because we know that a broken vehicle may never be replaced. The Americans treat their vehicles as ammunition, to be expended and resupplied." By the autumn of 1944, captured Jeeps had become so valuable to the Wehrmacht that standing orders required their immediate transfer to rear areas for evaluation and potential use. German units that captured Jeeps were ordered to report them directly to Army headquarters, bypassing normal salvage channels. The practical reason was simple. Jeeps worked with German fuel, required no special maintenance facilities, and could be operated by any driver. Unlike captured Sherman tanks, which needed specialized ammunition, or captured aircraft, which required specific fuels, a captured Jeep was immediately useful. General der Infanterie Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, issued a directive in October 1944. American general purpose vehicles captured in serviceable condition will be allocated as follows. First priority to Corps headquarters for reconnaissance and liaison duties. Second priority to division commanders for personal transport. Third priority to artillery units for ammunition, resupply, and forward areas. These vehicles are to be maintained with priority equal to tank recovery vehicles. The directive revealed how thoroughly German commanders had come to appreciate the Jeep's value. They were allocating captured enemy vehicles to their most critical functions. A tacit admission that American equipment had become essential to German operations. By late 1944, captured Jeeps were being used by German headquarters throughout the Western Front. Field Marshal Walter Model reportedly refused to use any vehicle except a captured Jeep for his frontline inspections, claiming it was more reliable than anything German industry could provide. General der Caballeria Siegfried Westphal, von Rundstedt's chief of staff, was photographed multiple times in American Jeeps during the final campaigns. The irony was not lost on American intelligence officers analyzing German communications. Major Paul Gruber of the G2 section noted, "We intercept German radio messages requesting spare parts for captured American vehicles. They are experiencing the same supply problems with our Jeeps that they would have with any other vehicle, but they prefer our supply problems to their own." That says something about what we've accomplished. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the ultimate test of the Jeep's importance to American operations. When German forces achieved surprise in the Ardennes, American units found themselves scattered, surrounded, and cut off from normal supply lines. The GB became the difference between units that maintained cohesion and units that disintegrated. Companies with Jeeps could evacuate wounded, bring up ammunition, maintain contact with neighboring units, and conduct reconnaissance of German positions. Companies without Jeeps were isolated, unable to respond to the fluid situation, dependent on foot messengers who might never arrive. Lieutenant Colonel Gruber described the chaos. "We had Jeeps running everywhere, all the time, in every direction. Messengers, reconnaissance, supply runs, evacuation. The Jeeps never stopped. When we ran out of gas, we siphoned from wrecked vehicles. When Jeeps broke down, we cannibalized parts from others. The Germans captured some of our Jeeps, but we captured them back. Sometimes the same vehicle 2 or 3 times. The whole battle was fought at Jeep speed." German commanders, attempting to exploit their breakthrough, found their advance hampered by the same mobility advantage that had frustrated them in Normandy. American units that should have been destroyed simply drove away, reformed elsewhere, and returned to the fight. Roadblocks that should have trapped entire battalions were bypassed by Jeeps taking alternate routes. SS Obersturmwanfer Johann Piper, commanding the spearhead of the German offensive, experienced this frustration directly. His powerful armored column repeatedly found American units escaping in their Jeeps, threading through terrain that tanks could not follow. The Americans refused to be trapped. Piper complained to his divisional commander, "Their small vehicles go everywhere. We block a road, they drive through the forest. We occupy a town, they circle around it. We cannot catch them because they are too mobile, and we cannot destroy their mobility because there are too many of their vehicles to destroy." The performance of the Jeep in the Ardennes cemented its reputation among American soldiers. The vehicle had proven itself in the most demanding conditions: winter warfare in mountainous terrain against a determined enemy. Men who had cursed the Jeep's rough ride and open design came to appreciate its absolute reliability when reliability meant survival. Staff Sergeant Theodore Roberts of the 30th Infantry Division wrote home after the battle, "That little Jeep saved my life twice in the Bulge. Once when it got us out of an ambush faster than the Germans could react. Once when it carried me to an aid station with a chunk of shrapnel in my leg. I used to complain about how cold it gets with no doors. I don't complain anymore. That Jeep is the best friend I've got over here." The final campaigns of the war demonstrated the Jeep's role in one last capacity: the pursuit of a defeated enemy across the German homeland. As Wehrmacht resistance collapsed in early 1945, American forces advanced at unprecedented speed. Armored columns drove hundreds of miles in days, bypassing strong points, cutting communications, and accepting the surrender of units that had lost all capacity to resist. This speed of advance was possible only because of motorized logistics, and the Jeep was the backbone of that system. Every armored column had Jeeps screening ahead and guarding flanks. Every infantry division had jeeps shuttling men and supplies forward. Every headquarters had jeeps, maintaining the communications network that coordinated the vast offensive. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army conducted some of the most dramatic advances of the war, was famously photographed dozens of times standing in or beside jeeps. His daily routine included jeep tours of the front lines, often driving himself, frequently under conditions that his staff considered reckless. Patton's chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, recalled, "The general loved that jeep. He said it was the only vehicle in the army that could keep up with his thinking. He would have us driving at top speed down roads that might or might not be clear of Germans, and he'd be standing up, looking around with binoculars, completely unconcerned." He said that Germans couldn't hit a moving jeep, and he was mostly right. German soldiers encountered the jeep in its final role as the vehicle of their conquerors. As American forces occupied German territory, jeeps became the visible symbol of the army that had defeated the Wehrmacht. For many German civilians and soldiers, the jeep was their first close encounter with American technology. They found it puzzling. This crude, noisy, uncomfortable vehicle was a standard mount of the army that had crushed the most powerful military machine in Europe. Where were the sophisticated vehicles that German propaganda had claimed American factories could not produce? The answer, of course, was that American factories had chosen not to produce sophisticated vehicles. They had produced effective vehicles instead. The distinction marked the fundamental difference between American and German approaches to industrial warfare. Generaloberst Alfred Jodl, chief of operations at Wehrmacht headquarters, remarked during his post-war interrogation, "We studied American equipment throughout the war. We found nothing revolutionary, nothing we could not have produced ourselves, often nothing as good as our own designs. We could not understand how they were defeating us with inferior equipment. We did not understand until too late that they were defeating us with infinite equipment." The Jeep was the perfect example, a vehicle that no German engineer would have designed. Produced in quantities no German factory could match, doing everything adequately while we tried to do everything perfectly. The American Jeep production numbers tell their own story. Between 1941 and 1945, Willys Overland produced 363,000 Jeeps. Ford produced 280,000 more. These 643,000 vehicles represented only the primary production. The number does not include the thousands of Jeeps produced under license in other countries or the later production that continued after the war. Compare these figures to German production of equivalent vehicles. The closest to the Jeep in concept and capability was produced in approximately 52,000 examples throughout the war. The Americans produced more Jeeps in the first 6 months of 1944 than Germany produced light military vehicles in the entire war. This disparity was not the result of German industrial weakness. German factories were highly capable, their workers skilled, their engineers among the best in the world. The disparity resulted from different industrial philosophies applied to the same problem. German industry sought to produce the best possible vehicles. American industry sought to produce the most possible vehicles. In a war of attrition spanning 5 continents and 4 years, the American approach proved decisive. The post-war analysis of the Jeep's role in Allied victory emphasized this industrial dimension. The U.S. Army's official history concluded, "The Jeep represented American industrial capability in mobile form. Every Jeep that rolled off an assembly line represented a tiny fraction of American productive capacity. Every Jeep that reached the front represented supply lines stretching back across oceans. Every Jeep that German forces encountered represented an industrial base they could not match and logistics they could not disrupt." After the war, German generals were extensively interviewed about their experience fighting American forces. Their comments on the Jeep revealed how thoroughly they had come to appreciate the vehicle they had initially dismissed. Field Marshal Erich von Monstein, considered by many the most capable German commander of the war, stated, "The American Jeep was not a weapon. It was something more important. It was a capability. It allowed the American army to do things that no other army could do, not because the vehicle was superior, but because there were so many of them that every purpose could be served. We had to choose between reconnaissance and evacuation, between communication and supply. The Americans never had to choose. They had Jeeps for everything." General der Panzertruppen Hasselborn Manteuffel, who commanded German forces in the Battle of the Bulge, offered a similar assessment. "I learned to respect the Jeep in the Ardennes. We would destroy them by dozens, and the next morning there would be more. We would capture them, and the Americans would simply use others. The vehicle itself was nothing remarkable. The number of vehicles was everything. It was American production, American logistics, American industrial power, all compressed into a small package that went everywhere and did everything. Perhaps the most telling comment came from General Oberst Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare, the man who had sent panzers racing across Poland and France in the campaigns that shocked the world. The Americans won the war with three things. Guderian told American interrogators in 1945, the DC-3 aircraft, the C-2 detonator, and the Jeep. If I had to choose the most important, I would choose the Jeep. Not because it was the best vehicle, because it was the most American vehicle. It was simple when our vehicles were complex. It was everywhere when our vehicles were scarce. It was adequate when our vehicles were excellent, and adequate multiplied by thousands defeats. Excellent multiplied by dozens. This is the lesson of the war, and the Jeep is its proof. The Jeep's legacy extended far beyond the Second World War. The vehicle that had been designed in weeks for an emergency became the ancestor of an entire category of automobiles, the modern SUV. The recreational four-wheel drive vehicle. The entire concept of off-road capability for civilian transportation all trace their lineage to Karl Probst's hasty design in the summer of 1940, recognized the commercial potential immediately after the war, and introduced the CJ to the first civilian Jeep. In 1945, the company marketed it to farmers, construction companies, and outdoor enthusiasts. They sold over 200,000 in the first 5 years, demonstrating that the qualities which had proven so valuable in war were equally attractive in peace. The Jeep's design philosophy influenced military vehicle development worldwide. When the U.S. Army needed a replacement in the 1980s, they specified a vehicle that could be maintained by soldiers in the field, that used standardized parts, that prioritized simplicity and reliability over advanced features. The result was the Humvee, which, for all its differences in size and capability, embodied the same basic approach that had made the Jeep successful. But the Jeep's greatest legacy was conceptual rather than mechanical. It demonstrated that industrial warfare rewarded different virtues than traditional military thinking assumed. The German military tradition emphasized excellence, professionalism, and technical superiority. German weapons were the best designed, German soldiers the best trained, German tactics the most sophisticated. These advantages had produced stunning victories in the war's early years. The American military tradition emphasized production, logistics, and sufficiency. American weapons were good enough, American soldiers adequately trained, American tactics workmanlike. These characteristics produced victories in the war's final years that German excellence could not prevent. The Jeep embodied the American approach in physical form. It was good enough for every purpose, produced in quantities that made excellence irrelevant. It was the vehicle of an army that understood something German generals learned too late. In modern warfare, the side that can replace its losses wins. The side that cannot, no matter how brilliant its victories, eventually loses. Generalmajor Friedrich von Bruch survived the war and lived until 1974. In a 1968 interview with an American military historian, he was asked about his first encounter with the Jeep in Tunisia 26 years earlier. I remember standing there in the dust, von Bruch sighed, looking at this small vehicle that seemed so insignificant. I thought it was a toy. I thought the Americans did not understand modern warfare. He paused, an old man remembering an old war. I was wrong. We were all wrong. The Americans understood modern warfare better than we did. They understood that wars are won by factories as much as by soldiers. They understood that 1,000 adequate vehicles defeat 100 excellent vehicles. They understood that simplicity is a weapon. That Jeep I saw in Tunisia was not a toy. It was a warning. We should have known then that we could not win. An army that could produce such a vehicle in such quantities that could send it halfway around the world and lose it without concern. They could have so many that they could afford to leave one standing in the desert for the enemy to examine. Such an army was not an army we could defeat. The Jeep was not their best vehicle. It was their most American vehicle, and that, in the end, was what mattered. The Jeep that von Breuch examined that November morning in 1942 was eventually shipped back to Germany for technical analysis. German engineers disassembled it completely, measured every component, analyzed every material. They produced a detailed report, concluding that they could easily manufacture a superior vehicle. They never did. German industry remained committed to producing excellent vehicles in limited quantities, while American industry produced adequate vehicles in unlimited quantities. The war ended with Germany's superior vehicles immobilized for lack of fuel and parts, while American Jeeps drove through the rubble of Berlin. In the years since, military historians have debated which weapon most influenced the war's outcome. The atomic bomb ended it. The B-17 carried the strategic bombing campaign. The Sherman tank provided armored striking power. The aircraft carrier revolutionized naval warfare. But the Jeep moved everything else. It carried the men who fought, the supplies they needed, the messages that coordinated them, the wounded who survived. It went everywhere, did everything, and never stopped coming. When German generals discovered the American Jeep, they discovered something more important than a vehicle. They discovered a philosophy of warfare that valued quantity over quality, adequacy over excellence, logistics over tactics. They discovered an enemy that would bury them not under superior weapons, but under sufficient weapons in overwhelming numbers. They discovered why they would lose the war. The Jeeps kept coming. That was the message of the American way of war, written in olive drab paint on 600,000 small vehicles that went everywhere and did everything. The Jeeps kept coming, and nothing Germany could do would ever stop them.